Jackson Lee, the Texas Congresswoman, a member of the Judiciary Committee, talking to her former congressional colleague, Keith Ellison, who is now, of course, the Attorney General of Minnesota and is carrying forth this very difficult prosecution. Right now in Washington, the country's Attorney General William Barr and FBI Director Chris Wray and other officials are talking about the federal response to the protests here in Washington. Let's listen.
Our free order. That ancient principle still holds true. Our free society depends on the rule of law, the assurance that ordinary citizens can go about their lives without being subject to arbitrary violence or fear. When the rule of law breaks down, the promise of America does also. Our nation is now confronting two serious challenges to the rule of law. The first is a long-standing one, but was recently crystallized and driven home by the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The video of the police conduct in this episode, as I said before, is harrowing. When you watch it and imagine that one of your own loved ones was being treated this way and begging for their lives, it is impossible for any normal human being not to be struck to the heart with horror. This matter is being pursued by both the state and the federal government. The state has filed already second-degree murder charges against one of the officers and aiding and abetting charges against the other three officers. As we typically do in cases such as this, the Department of Justice and the FBI is conducting a parallel and independent investigation into possible violations of federal civil rights laws. The President has directed me to spare no effort. We are coordinating our work with the Attorney General of Minnesota, and as a matter of comedy, the Department of Justice typically lets the state go forward with its proceedings first. This afternoon, our United States Attorney in Minnesota and the FBI Special Agent in charge of our Minneapolis field office, the FBI's field office, will attend a memorial service for Mr. Floyd. Today is a day of mourning. And the day is coming soon, I am confident, when justice will be served. George Floyd's death was not the first of its kind, and it exposes concerns that reach far beyond this particular case. While the vast majority of police officers do their job bravely and righteously, it is undeniable that many African Americans lacked confidence in our American criminal justice system. This must change. Our Constitution mandates equal protection of the laws, and nothing less is acceptable. As the nation's leading federal law enforcement agency, the Department of Justice will do its part. I believe that police chiefs and law enforcement officials and leaders around the country are committed to ensuring that racism plays no part in law enforcement and that everyone receives equal protection of the laws. In October 2019, the President established the first Commission on Law Enforcement since the 1960s, and I am meeting with them later this month. And I have been talking to law enforcement leaders around the country. And in the weeks and months ahead, we will be working with community leaders to find constructive solutions so that Mr. Floyd's death will not have been in vain. We will work hard to bring good out of bad. Unfortunately, the aftermath of George Floyd's death has produced a second challenge to the rule of law. While many have peacefully expressed their anger and grief, others have hijacked protests to engage in lawlessness. Violent rioting, arson, looting of businesses, and public property, assaults on law enforcement officers and innocent people, and even the murder of a federal agent. Such senseless acts of anarchy are not exercises of First Amendment rights. They are crimes designed to terrify fellow citizens and intimidate communities. As I told the governors on Monday, we understand the distinction between three different sets of actors here. The large preponderance of those who are protesting are peaceful demonstrators who are exercising their First Amendment rights. At some demonstrations, however, there are groups that exploit the opportunity to engage in such crimes as looting. And finally, at some demonstrations, there are extremist agitators who are hijacking the protests to pursue their own separate and violent agenda. We have evidence that Antifa and other similar extremist groups, as well as actors of a variety of different political persuasions, have been involved in instigating and participating in the violent activity. And we are also seeing in the violent activity, instigating and participating in the violent activity. Actors of a variety of different political persuasions have been involved in instigating and participating in the violent activity. And we are also seeing foreign actors playing all sides to exacerbate the violence. The Department of Justice is working to restore order in the District of Columbia and around the nation. Here in Washington, we are working with the local police, the citizen soldiers of the National Guard, and other federal agencies to provide safety and justice. We have deployed all the major law enforcement components of the department on this mission, including the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, the Bureau of Prisons, and the U.S. Marshal Service. Their leaders are with me today and we'll be talking shortly. I thank all of these leaders and their components for working bravely and professionally to protect the district. I'm pleased to say that, especially over the last two nights, the demonstrations, while large, have been peaceful. The Justice Department is also working closely with our state and local partners to address violent riots around the country. Our federal law enforcement efforts are focused on the violent instigators. Through the FBI, U.S. attorneys' offices, component field offices, and state and local enforcement, we are receiving real-time intelligence, and we have deployed resources to quell outbreaks of violence in several places. I urge governors and mayors and other state and local leaders to work closely with the National Guard and with us. The federal government has thus far made 51 arrests for federal crimes in connection with violent rioting. We will continue to investigate, to make arrests, and to prosecute where warranted. When I was Attorney General in 1995,
Joining me now, Clint Watts, former FBI special agent, who's been watching the Attorney General along with me, and of course has been teaching counterterrorism courses to law enforcement for the past 15 years. As an expert, Clint, this is the first time I've heard the Attorney General say that we are also seeing foreign actors trying to exacerbate or take advantage of this. In his previous on-camera moment a couple of days ago and in his statements, he focused mostly, if not entirely, on left-wing violent agitators. But now we've had some white supremacists who've been arrested in Denver, and also your reporting, what do we know about any foreign actors, including Russia, trying to take advantage of the problems here in the United States?
Yeah, Andrea, what's interesting about it is the Attorney General talked about this full spectrum, and I would tell you that we see everything from brazen criminals using the protests as an opportunity to conduct theft and violence, to extremists on the left and the political right wings and you have countries like Russia and China using the protests to essentially get their message out and bash the United States. I'm not seeing any direct evidence of foreign countries going into and amplifying these protests or messing around, but I have seen them amplifying the disunity in this country, essentially making fun of the United States for being in a state of disarray. One thing that I do find a little disturbing about the way the Attorney General postured it is he named one group in his speech, but he couldn't name many other so-called groups or movements. There was a major arrest outside of Las Vegas with what is known as the Boogaloo group and this extremist movement, which has a very anti-government fringe. We've seen white supremacists surface in this space. And I think when he talks about the 51 arrest, which I'm thrilled that the federal law enforcement is enforcing that, I would really like to know if we're going to be calling this terrorism or domestic terrorism or pushing for such a designation, what are we really talking about with those 51 arrests? Is this an organized terrorist movement? And if so, we need to offer evidence. If not, we need to help everybody understand what's going on, because it's creating a lot of misinformation and disinformation inside the United States that gets politicized by political ads coming out of the White House even yesterday.
And as briefly, Clint, as all of these different agencies that were deployed in D.C., which is the one area that isn't a state, and so there's no governor to say, thank you, but no thanks. We also had the Bureau of Prisons, but they were apparently unbadged, which created questions by many of the demonstrators, the protesters, that who are these people in riot gear who are trying to block them or arrest them?
The scale and severity of these protests are fueled by conspiracies. And as long as there's conspiracies out there, you need to provide information quickly and early on. What if this press conference that's going on right now, which is a necessary press conference, it happened on Tuesday? You should be communicating to the public before you are deploying force so that they understand what they are seeing. Yesterday, it was a complete vacuum. And when you see people show up in unmarked uniforms who won't say who they are, you have to wonder, what is their authority to be out enforcing some sort of security? Are you supposed to obey them? This press conference could have been done 2 days ago, and it would have quelled a lot of the conspiracies that are empowering the violence that you're seeing out in the streets right now.
Or even done before the president made his threats to have the Insurrection Act used against various states. Thank you so much, Clint Watts. We should also point out that Mayor Bowser here in D.C. has announced that there will be no curfew. She is suspending the curfew, and in fact, it was not enforced. Thousands of people were out overnight in peaceable protests. And
trying to put that together. But if Trump can say, instead of the fact that people...
Where's the place, Drew?
The anger also spilling over into the NBA. Lakers superstar LeBron James writing, "Wow, man, you literally still don't understand why Cap was kneeling on one knee. Has nothing to do with disrespect of the flag." Former NBA player Steven Jackson, a childhood friend of George Floyd, equally frustrated.
You play for New Orleans and you live in New Orleans. All the black people in New Orleans that support you, Jubby, you got to be a little bit more sensitive to the timing, bro.
And joining me now, NBC's Stephanie Gosk and Washington Post political reporter Eugene Scott, who writes about identity politics, among many other things. Stephanie, Drew Brees just showed such insensitivity to his own teammates and to the struggle that this country is in right now.
Well, I think we should go through the timeline here, Andrea, and see how this played out. Drew Brees did an interview with Yahoo Finance. He was specifically asked about this issue of how he's going to feel in the fall when players inevitably protest racial injustice and police brutality by kneeling during the national anthem. Obviously, in the wake of everything that's been going on in this country, you're likely to see something like that. He was pointedly asked that question, and his answer was, "I believe that it is disrespectful to the flag and the country to kneel during the anthem." He then, after those comments, which were quite long, were then highly...
It's disrespectful to the sports agency, because the sports agency is not a political party. The sports agency is about playing sports. And it doesn't matter if it's football, baseball, basketball, soccer, hockey, hardball, softball. It don't matter. Sports is sports. And it should be looked upon as being a sport event, not a political event, not a religious event. It's a sports event. No one's saying anything about anybody being disrespectful, or I'm not, to somebody kneeling on the field being disrespectful to the flag. You're being disrespectful to the sport industry that you're a part of, because that is not the proper time or the proper place to be showing defiance while the national anthem is being played. Now, if you want to protest like they're doing now, if you want to gather up a bunch of signs and wind up on national TV somewhere, then go do it. Go protest. Go burn you a flag if that's what you feel like that you need to do. I don't support the idea of burning the flag. I never have. And I never will. Because I'm a born red-blooded American. If you was to do something like that over in another country, you would probably be killed. I know you'd be in prison for it, but you would probably be killed in another country if you went in and desecrated their national symbol that way. People take our freedoms here in America too far. And it's not necessarily that they're disrespecting the flag, but they're disrespecting the association that they're involved in, and they're using that time to display a political statement, which, like I said before, I'm against. Because if you're going to play football, you don't need to go out there with a basketball. If you're going to play football, let's play football. If you're going to play basketball, you don't need to be out there with a football. You need to be out there with a basketball. Same way with soccer, same way with hockey, same way with runners, same way with NASCAR. If you're going to be out there running 200 miles an hour, what business do you have if you got a Pinto that barely can reach 55, 60 miles an hour? I mean, come on. There's a right place and a right time for everything. And I think that's what I was addressing. I think it was what the President of the United States was addressing. I can't say for sure, but I know for a fact that that's what I was addressing. People get confused, they get mixed up. People are angry, they're showing indignation, they're showing hostility. And I'm like the Surgeon General, they shouldn't be doing that. Nobody should display destruction just to be able to get your message across. That's the reason why they call it peaceful protesting. They don't call it vicious protesting. They call it peaceful protesting. And if you want to stand out there with a sign, and if you want to show your rage and your anger in that way, that's okay. But if you want to show your anger and your rage in burning down a building, in burning down a car, in bringing harm and hurt into innocent people's lives, that is not okay. The Bible is very clear towards stating the fact that we are to be wise as serpents but harmless as doves. Harmless. These people around here tried to provoke me into not only anger, but they tried to provoke me into the same level of violence, hostility that they was being fed off on. These people around here failed. They have failed in so many different areas. They failed whenever I was a child being raised up. They failed as far as not supporting the ministry, and they have failed in provoking the founder of the ministry that never did give in to their provoking. Because I was smart enough to stand back and to read through the lines and say, what's really going on here? Like I have stated before, if I would have got into a physical confrontation with Mr. Donald Ridgeway, Donnie Ridgeway, one of the main instigators out here during the past 4 or 5 years, if I would have got into a major confrontation with that individual to the point of me striking him somewhere in the face or on the head, and all of a sudden it was time for his aneurysm to break loose in his head, in which that's basically what the man I heard died from. An aneurysm broke in his head that caused him to have a major stroke, and 4 or 5 days later they had to cut the tides off on the life support. But if I would have hit him at the same time that his aneurysm gave way in his head and he would have bled out, I would have been accused of no lesser of a crime of manslaughter. And I would have had to approve it to the courts that my intent was not to want to kill Mr. Ridgeway, but that my intent was to defend myself from Mr. Ridgeway. What business would I have had towards walking out to the road, getting into a major confrontation with an individual that was provoking me into that type of atmosphere, into that type of engagement? In other words, I would have been just as guilty as him towards giving in. I would have gotten on his level towards getting into a major confrontation out here. And it wasn't just Donald Ridgeway. That's the part that Tommy Moore don't understand. It wasn't just Donald Ridgeway. It was about a third of them around here in this little old community that was either engaging directly or they was engaging indirectly towards allowing for it to happen and being entertained by it during the time that it was happening. That's the part that the courts here in Weakley County don't grasp and don't understand. Or if they do, they're not acknowledging it to the degree that they're being responsible for dereliction of duty. Because I still believe, like I believed, if things would have been handled differently during the time that Donald Ridgeway, Gail Ridgeway, and his daughter, Kelly Sheffield, took my brother David down on his own property and stuck a gun to his head, if things would have been handled properly with the court system, I never would have had to come back here in 2014 and dealt with such idiotic, more provoking behavior. If they would have been chastised, humiliated, punished properly, which that event happened in 2010, the events that started in my life in 2014 never would had occurred. That's the reason why I point my finger at Tommy Moore, because it went before his court, it went in front of him while he was wearing the robe, and he throwed it out of court. And he allowed for this situation out here to escalate. He allowed for this situation out here to evolve. He allowed for this situation out here to grow in the intensity that he was hoping that there was going to be a major, major ordeal. And it wouldn't have mattered if Jubby would have killed Donnie or Donnie would have killed Jubby, vice versa. It would have still been an event towards me shooting myself in the foot. Because it would have been the end of my liberty. It would have been the end of me being able to exist out into the eyes of the general public. I would have been either locked up or dead. That's what they were striving for. And they have failed in what that they have strived towards. They have failed in every attempt. From the attempt of what happened in 1983 in Kenton, Tennessee, whenever I first stepped foot in the eyes of the general public about the Antichrist, the false prophet, the doomsday devil's duel, the two prophets, witnesses out of the Bible, the four horsemen, the seven seals, the abomination of desolation that it speaks of in the book of Revelations. They have failed from the get-go since 1983 of destroying this ministry. And that's exactly what they was trying to do. They wasn't trying to destroy Jubby because of anything that Jubby is or was or has been, but they was trying to destroy Jubby of his future ability to have an effect on society in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the ministry, in the eyes of the Holy Spirit. That's what they was after. And I have figured them out towards what that they was after. And now since I've figured them out towards what that they was after, now they have even shunned me even more so in this community, including law enforcement, including the church society, if you want to call it a church society in this area. And I'm telling you right now, these plagues, these hard times, these events that continue to keep happening, regardless whether they're happening in the form of fires, famines, floods, bugs, pestilences, wars, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, meteor displacencies, solar flares, weather events dramatically changing from one event to another in an abnormal form. These events will only intensify until there is a true reckoning of what has happened to the ministry and to the founder of this ministry. Now they can play their little games all they want. They can be in denial, just like other cultures, just like other generations. You know, they all walked around snubbing their nose up at Noah until the very day until the gate shut, the door shut. And then beyond that point, they suffered. And they suffered immensely. And it wasn't just the guilty that suffered during that event. It was men, women, and children. It was the guilty as well as the non-guilty that suffered during that event. Whenever it says in the Bible that it rains upon the just as well as the unjust pertaining to the blessings of God, working as a whole in the eyes of society, that's the way God works. But whenever you exchange it and turn it around, pertaining to retribution, the wrath of God, it also falls just like it fell upon the blessings. In other words, whenever God gets ready to curse that particular organization or that particular state or that particular nation or that country or that planet, everybody suffers. Not just the guilty, not just the adults, but also the men, women, and children. The innocent suffer too as well. And that's where we are with society in accountability issues that obviously they're still running from to this day. Still running from accountability issues the same as Adam and Eve did back 6,000 plus years ago, according to the records, whenever Adam blamed Eve, that woman that you gave me caused me to do this. And then Eve looked at God and said, well, it was the devil's fault. The devil come in here and tempted me. And it was his fault, the reason why I done this. So everybody wants to continue to keep pushing the buck off on somebody else. That is the human characteristics of humanity. And it's still happening just as much today as what it was back in neons years ago. And if you can't see that and understand that, then obviously you're blinder than a bat and you can't see, you just can't see. You can't comprehend, you can't understand what's going on pertaining to this spiritual warfare that now I've been embarked upon now heavily since 1988, whenever I received my crown that I presently hold up onto my head, even to this day. Even to this day. I repeat it one more time. Even to this day. that I can physically feel a crown of thorns up onto my head. And that's the part that the general public don't understand. That's the part that the general public would rather say, well, this individual, he's whacked. Or this individual, he's a liar. Or this individual is a blasphemer. Just like I was accused in Central Baptist Church, sitting there in front of one of the deacon body that used to be the Sunday school teacher of the same Sunday school class, looked at me and said, Jubby, you're committing blasphemy. And that was the very same thing that they told Jesus, that he was committing blasphemy. And the whole time, Jesus wasn't committing blasphemy. Jesus was telling the truth. Just like I'm telling the truth. Now they can falsely accuse me all they want. Just like they falsely accused Jesus, and they have falsely accused other prophets and teachers and holy men and righteous men throughout history. It ain't the first time that God's people have been falsely accused, and I'm sure it won't be the last time that they've been falsely accused. But the point that I'm trying to make here is, on accountability issues, we have a society today, even over George Floyd, I'll get the word out in a minute, Mr. George Floyd, in his memorial, we have a society to this day that is still struggling in accountability issues. And the reason why I say that is because if the prosecuting attorneys in that state would have done the right thing, first of all, they waited about 2 or 3 days until major protesting broke out before they ever arrested the primary officer that caused the death of this individual. And then they waited about a week later before they arrested all 4 of the officers that was engaged in this man's death. Does that tell you not how unjust that the Justice Department is in this country? Sure it is. Sure it is. In other words, do as I say, but not as I do. White man speaketh with forked tongue. They talk about wanting peace, but they don't a bit more want peace than a man on the moon. These judges and these prosecuting attorneys and all these courts and all these jails, they don't want peace, because if they had peace, we wouldn't no longer have to need all these courts and all these jails and all these prosecuting attorneys. They don't want peace. That's what I keep telling you. Not true, authentic, gospel, biblical Bible peace. No, they do not want that. They want divorces. They want homosexuals. They want lesbians. They want chaos. That's what these attorneys strive off of. Just like your ambulance chasing attorneys. They want people to get out here and get involved in major accidents so they can make a living, so they can panhandle off of these people's hardships. That's what the system is built around right now. It's built around corruption. It's built around bullshit. And that's not how our ancestors, the builders and the founders of this great nation, intended for this nation to run as. You got people, as far as I'm concerned, hell and death will be too good of a place for them to go to once they die miserably towards taking advantage of we the people. Good luck to all of us. Shalom.